We're off.
Okay. So the last couple of times we talked a bit about how to plan your line around the circuit, and also what to look for when you're trying to figure out what's wrong with your car, trying to feel what the car is doing so that you can have a better chance of tuning it. So today we're actually going to look at some of those tuning changes, some of the different categories of changes you can make to the car, and what are some of the more common or misunderstood setup changes as well. We'll look at some of those. So first off, I'm going to start with geometry in the car. I see a lot of guys tweaking their springs, tweaking their roll centers, and trying to tune their cars with you know, the dynamic characteristics of a race car. And often they'll overlook simple geometry changes, such as, for example, a rear toe is a big one, and also the front toe. Like for people who are running carpet rubber tires, I see some guys that are on low traction surface running about 2 degrees in the back. That doesn't work unless you're on a pretty high bike track. Normally 2.5 to 3 is where you want to start, and take it down from there if your back end is too locked in. The other big one is Ackerman. A lot of people don't play with Ackerman on their setups.
What about the front?
What's that?
He was going to touch on the front.
On the front?
Yeah.
Front toe? Yes, let's do that. On the front, if you're running exactly 0 front toe, you'll always have a little bit of slop in your wheels. It'll seem like the car is wandering a little bit. So I always run, if I want the front end to be a little bit more forgiving, I'll run just like a 1/2 degree or in, or a 1/2 degree out. I'll never run it straight. Because then it'll feel like if you're running slightly in or slightly out, it'll feel like the car is actually locked in. It's a little more responsive. And also the inboard front toe in or toe out, that actually makes a big difference in carpet racing and also in outdoor racing on rubber tires. I usually run about 1 degree out up to about 2.5 degrees inboard out. Outside I'll still run about half out altogether, but the inboard toe out, if you run them fairly straight, you're going to get more twitch in the car, and it's going to feel flatter and thin. Whereas if you run more inboard toe out, then you're going to get smoother turn in, and you're going to get quite a bit more mid-corner steering. Like the apex speed will carry a little bit more. It's going to keep biting into the corner. So for smoother flowing tracks, that's definitely the way to go. Oh yes, the other one was Ackerman. A lot of people don't play with Ackerman very much. For tight, low grip tracks, which is what we have here, you'd want to run quite a bit of Ackerman. So you'd want to have your steering legs almost straight, like try to push them back a little bit, and that'll smooth out the car a little bit. If you run too much Ackerman when you get high bites, what you're going to get is a lot of scrubbing coming into the corner, and so there you want to run less Ackerman. So push your middle link or your pivot more towards the front. You're going to find that the car actually carves around the corner a lot smoother rather than biting into the car and scrubbing speed. So those are the two big ones in geometry that people don't really pay a whole lot of attention to. Definitely. Some of the other ones in geometry, we have down here caster. On touring cars, it's usually around 40 degrees that everybody runs. But in 12 scale, if you're running a 12 scale car, pay a lot of attention to caster, because you can change the active caster as well as the static caster. And if you're not playing around with that, you should. It makes quite a bit of a difference, especially the active caster. Because if you run very little active caster in a 12 scale, it'll feel twitchier and slightly less steering in mid-corner. If you run more active caster, it's going to come in smoother and then bite harder throughout the corner. Definitely play with that if you're running 12 scale. So some of the other ones regarding outside of geometry. We're going to start talking about characteristics related to weight transfer. There's two main ones that we're going to mention and start talking about. The front to back weight transfer and what things you can do to change that, as well as the side to side transfer. So looking at the front to back, not many people will mess with their wheelbase. And that's your primary tool for changing your weight transfer. So if you're looking at the front to rear tires, and you got your center of gravity somewhere around there. If you change your wheelbase, you start moving this wheel, the front wheel. If you shorten your front wheelbase, you're effectively moving a lot more weight over the front wheel. And what you're going to find is that with that extra weight up front, it's going to be slightly harder to get moving. But once it does, it's going to bite harder. So you're going to get a slightly smoother turn-in, and you're going to get a lot more mid-corner steering. Same with the rear. Rear is kind of opposite. If you shorten up the rear end, you're going to notice that the back ends on power will want to rotate a little bit more. So usually when you change the front, it'll affect more the characteristics of when you're actually transferring weight to the front, right? Such as when you're turning in. When you're coming on power with a slightly shorter wheelbase, you'll probably notice a little bit more corner steering, but not a whole lot. And then the rear would be affected when you're transferring again weight to the back. And so if you shorten up the rear wheelbase, you're essentially transferring more weight over that rear wheel, and it's going to want to power slide a little bit more. Whereas if you have a very long rear wheelbase, you're going to notice that the rear just tends to follow the front more. It'll straighten out more coming out of a corner and just kind of follow it. So where I find this helps a lot is when you have a long turn-in, such as a sweeper coming into a hairpin. You want to essentially continuously keep turning and tightening that corner. For Lethbridge, they had a couple of sections like that. I shortened this up quite a bit so that I could kind of turn it smoother and keep turning it. And then the back, I also shortened it up quite a bit as well. And that was just to allow me to get on the power sooner. Because then you can kind of power slide out of the corner a little bit sooner so you can get on the gas and still keep turning. Whereas if you straighten it out, it'll, or if you lengthen the rear wheelbase, the car will straighten out sooner. And then you kind of have to get on the gas later if you got a really long sweeper to get out. So outside of changing the wheelbase in terms of the front weight balance, you can also change springs and shock oil. So the shock oil essentially slows down your reaction, and the springs will prevent or counteract weight transfer. So if you have stiffer front springs, it'll allow less weight to get transferred to the front. But once you do change shocks or springs, you're not only changing the front to rear balance, but you also start changing the side to side balance. So that's why sometimes we resort to just changing the wheelbase when I want to change the way the car's behaving front and back. So the other one we'll look at will be the kind of the side-to-side characteristics of this car. And some of these techniques, like for a beginner, you probably wouldn't worry about too much. But if you're one of the guys that's looking for that last quarter of a second to get to the front of the field, that's when you'll start looking at things like this. So we'll try these car tires. let's say you have chassis